Robert Doar, president of the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for joining us today on this Zoom call. We are living in very interesting times, are we not?
That's correct. This is a time like no other.
Yeah. The pandemic is kind of led, obviously, to severe economic contraction. We've seen the most recent numbers. My guess is, and I'd be interested in your point of view, that they're going to be worse going forward, at least for a little while. And we've heard estimations. I'm always skeptical of this notion of the next Great Depression and this, that, and the other. But from your vantage point, both as president of AEI, but also your expertise with safety net programs and those kinds of things, how should we be looking at this economy currently and going forward? And then also reforming and enhancing those safety nets that currently are in existence. Because there's a lot of talk, as you know, we just heard in the last few days, $2,000 a year to everybody all the time, forever. We've seen a lot of kind of interesting ideas. What are your thoughts about both the economy today and safety nets?
Well, the economy today is very badly troubled, and it's a tragedy. Only 4 months ago, we were at a great spot. Unemployment was at historic lows. Poverty rates were at historic lows. The wages were rising at the bottom faster than they were in other parts of the economy. So the effect of the COVID virus and the effect of the actions our governments have felt they had to take in order to slow the spread and to allow our hospitals to get prepared for potential big increase in people in need of care has really been tragic in that it's hurting our economy very severely. Now, my hope is that it's as temporary as possible, that we do what we need to do. We provide relief and assistance to people to get through this difficult time, but then we get back to a growing and employing economy with different kinds of practices, perhaps, but we could get back to an economy that's as strong as it was before. That's the real goal. I am hesitant to make long-term significant changes in our safety net programs based on an emergency that hopefully can be temporary. I am hopeful, as I always am, and positive and confident in American ability and human ability to adapt and innovate to find solutions to this healthcare challenge. So I'm still hopeful that the healthcare industry, healthcare world, pharmaceuticals will come up with both a therapeutic and a vaccine, and that we'll learn how to get through this pandemic so that it is not recurring next winter or recurring next year, and we can go forward and get back to where we were. So it's a bad time because of the effects of what we've had to do in order to slow the spread of the virus. We have Congress and the president have, pretty much thrown the kitchen sink at the wall in terms of spending to provide relief. And I'm not one that thinks that was insufficient. I mean, I that's a lot of money. And I see it in the community that I'm living in. I talk to people and they say, well, they got their tax rebate that came in, and others, small businesses, say they made access to the PPP program.
Right.
So I think we've done quite a lot to provide relief for this circumstance, and we've got some challenges. But the main thing now is to get so that we can get through this emergency period and back to where we were before. And I'm not ready to say that the whole world has changed and that we'll never be like we were before, and we're going to have 10% unemployment for as long as the eye can see. So that's my view. I hope I'm right. I think for the sake of low-income Americans, I hope I'm right, because they're the ones who are most hurt by this.
Right.
And I don't honestly think, and I hope we get into a discussion of benefits versus earnings, but I really feel that a decision because of this to go to a much more widespread sort of cradle to grave income support from the federal government for all Americans is a big mistake. It will undermine the incentive to work, will reduce the dignity that comes from work, will harm families, and I'm hoping we don't go there.
Yeah. Benefit versus earnings. touch a little bit more on that. What kind of discussion do you hope to see going forward?
Well, it's maybe not well understood, but our safety net system in the United States for able-bodied, these are not ill or disabled people, really is about leveraging earnings with some benefits that can make work pay. And not everyone likes this idea that people who work at low wages are also eligible for various benefits to top up wages. But it is what we have. It's what the United States has chosen to do. And it works to reduce poverty, and it makes people more economically solid than they would be based on earnings alone, and certainly more economically solid based on benefits alone.
Right.
So our approach has been this combination. We believe in the value of work. We believe in the benefits of employment, and we've encouraged and tried to incentivize that with our safety net program in a way that other countries maybe have not. And for those people that view income as an entitlement that everyone should have or a right, this is a little bit troubling because it says, no, we expect a reciprocal responsibility from the recipient of assistance, also has responsibility to make some effort to get into work. I like that. Others don't, but that's what we've chosen. And the key ingredient in the discussion going forward is, will those who support more benefits and less focus on work win? Or will those who focus on work as a prerequisite to receiving benefits, will they win?
Right.
And that's a debate that's been going on for a while. During President Obama's period, he made a little bit of effort to increase the benefit side because he increased the government support for public health insurance. But by and large, we've been at this point where we really do encourage work and then reward work with refundable tax credits or food stamp benefits. And I think that's led to a significant reduction in poverty and child poverty in the United States from previous periods. Now, the last thing I'd say, Bob, is that this is not getting people safely all the way to the middle class. I acknowledge that. This is the people who are at this level of earnings plus benefits, they're still struggling and they're still facing
Right.
hardship and struggle, but they're not destitute. They're not the way we used to see in the Appalachia or the inner city of New York or Los Angeles, this real, very hardcore generational poverty. And they are more likely, or they were until the pandemic, they were more likely to be working. And that's just better. And
Yeah.
I like it better. It's better for them. It's better for their children. They have better outcomes for their kids. But now with this blow to the economy, people are saying, well, there are no jobs. So let's replace all of that emphasis on work with just transfer payments. And in a short term, that may be acceptable when there are really no jobs. But over the long term, that is not where we want to be.
Right. Obviously, organizations like ours, American Enterprise Institute, AEI, James Madison Institute, JMI, we share the belief in the principles of free markets, limited government, the protection of private property, that those principles bring the most people, the rule of law, bring the most people out of poverty and move people towards earned success, economic opportunity, economic prosperity. We obviously share those principles. With this pandemic and what we've seen over the last, 2 months or so, do those principles, do they still exist? Are they still good principles in your opinion? I know how I feel, but where are we going with this?
I think they are still good principles. They're not. They're under attack, and people are taking advantage of the
Right.
crisis to push an agenda, in my opinion, that is not good for the long-term health of the United States. So I think that no amount of transfer payment will be able to replace or do as well as the benefit from earnings. And the private sector being healthy is the number one ingredient to reducing poverty and increasing incomes. And if we don't focus on getting that part of our world healthy again, employing, we're going to muck around with government programs and government transfer programs, and we're not going to make a dent the way a growing, prospering free market economy can. And so it's not because I like the principle better or because I'm a private sector person or it's some sort of theory I've got. It's just a fact. And it's not just in the United States. The real damage of this turning away from free markets and capitalism and free trade that is occurring around the world is in developing countries where the progress we've made, the historic progress in reducing really serious poverty in countries outside of the United States and around the world is going to be set back unless we get back to a willingness to see the benefits of the free transfer of goods and services across borders and among people, because it serves to raise people's standard of living much more effectively than sending people a check for $1,200.
Right.
And so I think we're going to be able to do that in the United States because I think our values are there and our commitment to there. And I think people remember. They're going to be remembering what it was like in 2019, and they're going to
Yeah.
say, "Why can't I have that?" But around the world, it's going to be harder. And there's some aspects of it that are justified. We have a real problem with China right now, and
Right.
we're going to have a hard time being in the same place with them on trade. And that's going to be hard for our consumers, maybe. We'll have to pay a little more for certain products. Hard for our businesses that do business in China. That may be true. But it's really going to be hard for? It's going to be really hard for the Chinese people who no longer have access to the markets that they did when we had a more free and open trade between countries. And that's a price they're going to pay for, I think, the bad behavior of their regime. But it will also be tragic for their families and their livelihoods. And so I
Right.
worry about that as much as equally as I do about people in the United States.
You talk about the health of a private economy. If you could get into the president's ear, if you could wave a magic wand over Congress and have them move forward, what would be some of the ways that you would like to see us practical? I'm not talking from a politically practical standpoint. That may happen, that may not. But in your opinion, what are some of the best ways to move forward to regain the health of the private economy here in America?
Well, in some respects, it is don't get in the way, and free up and let the genius of the private sector economy get started again. I
So
think that will.
you're not running for office with the tagline "Don't get in the way."
No, I'm not. I'm not running for office. I'm not running for office for anything. I just think that and this is not particularly popular right now. There are lots of people that are pushing back. Not only, I
Right.
should say, um, um, to traditional sort of collectivists who are more likely on the political left, but there's some people on the right that are really advocating for much more strong and intrusive government. President Trump
Yeah.
is a pretty big believer in spending and government intervention, and I think, but I think in the long term that's going to actually hinder the growth of our economy. So that would be one. I do like the effort during this relief period to try to keep employers employing people. So the idea that instead of sending people a check to not work, we send checks to businesses to keep people employed. I like that. It's also shown that the implementation of a brilliant idea from the federal government in a country as big as ours is often problematic and
Right.
wasteful. So I'm concerned about that. I do support the efforts that the current president has made and others have made to reduce regulation and allow government businesses to operate with greater freedom. And I'm a supporter of relatively controlled and limited taxation that allow people to save and keep more of what they earn. So those are, and I know I kind of sound like the old school or the old hymn, and we've heard that before, but those old schools and those old hymns have worked, and I'm going to keep saying that those are where we should be focused on as principles, while there is a role for government and there's a role for the federal government in an emergency to do big things to shore up our hospital system or to help our states deal with a real crisis or to stimulate investment in pharmaceuticals that can solve this problem. But let's not take all of that to mean that the government should take over the American economy. That would be a disaster.
What do you see going forward for AEI in terms of priority issues that you all will be dealing with, or maybe even areas of good public policy that you may not have dealt with in the same way in the past?
Well, I would like to just say that during this crisis, our public health expert, Scott Gottlieb, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, the former commissioner of the FDA, has been an outstanding participant in the public debate, both in advising governors and the president, but also in participating in the public debate through the production of papers. So we're going to continue to stay in that field. It's clearly an important and vital field, and we're going to stay focused on how do we solve this problem, because it is a problem. This is
Right.
a serious health crisis, and it has to be taken seriously. We're also going to be involved in a big way, and we've already written quite a lot about it, in the sort of future relationships with China. And so we have scholars like Nick Eberstadt and Dan Blumenthal and Derek Scissors who are feeling as if we need to take a more eyes open approach toward China and their role in the world and their ambitions in the world and with their neighboring countries, and their sort of treatment of their own people. And we are going to say that because that's who we are. We believe that. But they're also going to say, but we got to be careful about looking out for the commercial interests of the United States that trade could benefit. There are benefits to some trading relations with China that are fair and free. There are benefits for our consumers. There are benefits for our businesses that do business in China. It's a huge market.
Right.
So will play a big role in trying to navigate that tricky issue. How do you both be strong with China, but also retain a relationship, a commercial relationship? And then finally, our economists are right now. I'm sure there's the various factions on how the government and the economy should be run are kind of divided up. The left side of the Democratic Party has gone, full socialist. One could say almost. I mean, it's very serious.
Right.
They almost nominated a socialist for president, Bernie Sanders. So they're clearly for much bigger government, much bigger intervention. There's something of a moderate wing in the Democratic Party somewhere in there. It's there somewhere. But on the right side of the political spectrum, there's some congressmen who are strongly advocating for a bigger role for the federal government in everyone's lives. And that's a little odd for people that have observed the right of center politics in the United States. And then there's President Trump, who I don't know really has a fixed ideology when it comes to the proper role of government in the economy. I mean, and he's a spender. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
He's a debt and deficit creator. And then there are people that are more like the traditional AEI scholar who are really worried about the growth of government and the infringements on the private sector economy that are slowing growth and the ability of people to hire. And that's the role we'll play. Our scholars will be more likely to be skeptical of collectivists, whether they're on the left or on the right, and try to make the case for free markets and free people and limited government. And that's, sometimes I read the newspapers and people say that's old school. No one's listening to that anymore, but we'll come back to it. You see, because it works.
I was going to say it works. I mean, historically, there's a reason why it's old school, because it works every time.
That's right.
Yeah. Couple more questions.
Sure.
Obviously the states are having to sort through when to open, how to open. Here in Florida, the governor has begun to reopen the economy, more so in, all but 3 counties where the worst of the coronavirus has hit. And that would be obviously Miami-Dade, Broward County, Palm Beach. For our Zoom listeners, that's the southeast coast of Florida and the bottom eastern tip of the state. As the states think through this, what do you see as opportunities in the role of state think tanks like the James Madison Institute to participate in these kinds of conversations?
Well, it's an important role. I think that one of the benefits of our country is our federalist system. We're a big country and we allow states to have some leeway on some parts of public policy, a lot of parts of public policy. And I think that's good. Government closest to the people is often better government. Um, and in this regard, with this crisis, we're really going to have a kind of a variety of natural experiments because some governors have taken an approach like Governor DeSantis, which has been a little less fearful of the potential impact on the hospital system and on lives that a really rapid spread of the virus could have. And other governors are taking, like Governor DeWine, another Republican governor in Ohio, took a much stronger approach. And I think it'd be unwise of me to sort of say, I know which solution is best. We don't know. We don't have enough. We're going to study it and watch it and observe it and learn from it. But I think that the state think tank's role is to provide us that up close view of what is happening in the states that they are in. And we can't study it as well based in Washington, but you're there. I mean, I'm really curious. The thing that I followed most closely is hospitalizations and beds versus capacity. And it's sometimes hard to find the beds versus capacity, but when you really look, it turns out hospitals did adjust and created capacity.
Yep.
And the demand has not been as big as we thought. Well, that's reassuring. That makes us feel like, you know, if some people do get sick, they will get care. A politician, a government official, and a think tank president can't really stand idly by and watch a hospital system become overrun.
Right.
You're not going to be able, you can be all the principled, free market, less intervention you want, but if more people are coming to a hospital system than that hospital system can stand, and people are not getting care, people are dying in the hallways, those sorts of things are happening, someone's going to have to do something about that.
Right.
That's a crisis. And so your job is to watch that and cover that and analyze it and discuss it. And if it turns out that one approach in one state worked better with a similar population than another approach in a different state, we want to write about that.
Yeah.
I mean, we want to learn from that. So I'm fascinated by the different approaches of various governors. There's a governor in Georgia. I think there's a governor in California who's done big things. We obviously have a governor in New York who, faced with a real disaster, had to make some very big decisions. So I just don't know what the outcome will be. I will tell you, I don't know what you're seeing with regard to, I'm kind of curious what you're seeing with regard to the mood of the people, or the mood of the people that, not only the people, but also the people that are really studying it. And right now it's worry. It's, okay, those shutdowns were damaging, were harmful to our economy, and they're frustrating. Individuals want to get out. And so when they hear that governors are lightening up, they are happy. But then there's also some evidence that indicates that there are risks. There are risks to, greater interactions with people, and we can say we wish there weren't risks, but there are risks. And so you and I are going to be watching the month of May in the United States. Is going to be very interesting to watch. And I think we all want it to work out well, where fewer people get sick, those who get sick get cared for and get better, and the economy can slowly come back to life. That's what we're hoping happens. And I'm not yet ready to say I'm sure it's going to happen, because there's a lot of unknowns out there. But the frustration that's been caused by the shutdowns is real. People want to get going. Yeah. And so it's a fascinating. If it weren't so unpleasant and tragic in some ways, for a scholar, it's going to be something very interesting to observe and watch and write about and study.
Yeah. Let's build on that last question for you, Robert. 1 year, 3 year, 5 year going forward, long term, are you a optimist or a pessimist, both for the economy and for America in general?
So I've always been, um, one of those Warren Buffett types, never bet against the United States, never been against the American people. I still believe that. Um, and so I'm an optimist. I think we'll get through this challenge as we've gotten through other challenges. But I will say the key to the future of our country is um, the individual, a key to the future of our country is the individual strength of all of us in our communities, in our towns and villages. And I believe strongly that that strength is still there. But we've had some long-term trends that scholars at AEI have been observing concerning family formation and male employment and labor force participation that are troubling. And drug use is another troubling aspect. And participation in religious, which is an indication of a sort of human capital strength. Those worry me a little bit. So I never been against the United States, and I believe in the American people, but I do also think that there are some concerning erosions of important values um, in uh, in our families and communities that worry me. Given a family formation, the marriage rate is down an all-time low. The birth rate is at an all-time low, practically. That's not a good sign.
Right.
That worries me. So and I have to say there's a you know I there are certain policies that the Trump administration has pursued that I support, no doubt about it. Less regulation, lower taxes. I like their view on the Supreme Court judges. I get all of that. But there's a rhetoric and a tone and a spirit and an aspect of their administration that's so harsh and so divisive. And it's quite popular with a lot of people. And that worries me a little bit. And so I'm I'm normally positive and optimistic, and I'm going to stay that way. Darn it! But we need to remember that there are certain core values that make us strong, and we've got to remind ourselves that those core values need to be exhibited by our leaders.
Great way to end. Robert Doar, president of the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for joining us today here in Tallahassee with JMI.
Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it.